解到机密画作。You are not alone. I come from a world far from yours. I have journeyed across an ocean of stars to reach you. For some time, your world has sheltered one of my citizens. For reasons unknown, he has chosen to keep his existence a secret from you. He will have made efforts to blend in. He will look like you. But he is not one of you.
Penetration, the question of extraterrestrial and human telepathy. Ingo Swann. Penetration. Number 4, psychic touchdown on the moon. Number 5, humanoids on the moon. Number 6, feedback of sorts. Number 7, the event in Los Angeles. Somewhat of a cheery conversation while eating, among other topics brought up by Axel Rode. He wanted to know more about what I knew about telepathy. We chatted this up. I thought this was merely innocent conversation. Chapter 4, Psychic Touchdown on the Moon. I had spent a nervous night. First of all, the bed was kind of hard and there was no sound in the room, so I listened to my heart pumping in the dark silence. I felt a little claustrophobic, which reminded me of how I had responded inside the Great Pyramid in Egypt when I had visited in 1973. I sifted through possibilities, wondering if all of this could be possibly a deeply covert KGB thing. Axel Rode looked and acted American enough, but the twins? Openly confessed, my attention was on the $1,000 a day thing. By 1975, I had been inside research for about 5 years. When it was arranged for me to take part in those earlier experiments, the first order of business in the minds of the researchers was to figure out how to pay me the least possible, and preferably to pay me nothing. The $1,000 a day was a real and much needed windfall for me, so I worried about many ways it could get messed up. Failing to provide good side data was one way, but as I had found, if one talks about things people don't understand, then they lose interest. Another way was not to provide what the client wanted. I had no idea what Axel Rhodes wanted. Maybe they, whomever they were looking for a good place to build moon bases. Maybe they had lost a secret spacecraft or something along those lines. But there I was, nervous on that, deep underground somewhere, twisting on a hard bed. Well, I'd remote view the moon and get it over with. I didn't expect to see much on the moon. Dead satellite, airless, dust, craters, etc. Anyhow, the mystery was a bit much if one took time to think about it, being dragged around in hoods. Really? I determined never to get caught up in such an affair again. We started our work early the next morning, which I immediately dubbed Moon Probe. As we had done in the Jupiter project, I asked Axel to find out where the moon was in its monthly cycle, which is to say, its present relationship to Earth and the Sun. The moon is full, he began, opposite the Sun, and the moon is just setting in the west. Will that do? I hope so, I replied. Earth is between the Sun and the moon, then what I have to try to do is head directly away from the Sun, hoping for a psychic touchdown. I smiled and said this on the moon's surface. Okay, do your thing then, Axel smiled. He pushed the record button on his tape recorder. Earlier that morning we had discussed the experiment's protocol, the way the session was to be conducted. Except for voicing the lunar coordinates when I asked for them, Axel was to make no verbal inputs. I talk out loud when doing my thing, asking myself a series of questions, but these are questions to aid my intellect in trying to understand what I'm experiencing. These are not questions others need to respond to while I'm at work. I do not like to close my eyes when I'm doing my thing. I settled back and tried to get a sense of Earth being between the sun and the moon, and slowly began to have images of rising upwards from Earth until I could see its curvature. As I had already learned from my efforts to get psychically to Jupiter, the sun looks much smaller to my psychic senses than it does when we eyeball it on Earth. Seen psychically, and if seeming smaller, at least 3 envelopes of some kind are clearly visible around the solar star. In any event, I tried psychically to head away from the sun toward the moon. This now looked larger than it does when eyeballing it. I had no problem getting there, slowly at first. It grew larger and larger and then swiftly filled my psychic vision completely. A whitish thing with grays, darks, and surprisingly, a lot of yellows in it. Suddenly, I was kind of sucked towards it faster, as if in a gravity free fall. Next, I had the sensation of being next to some pumice-like rocks. Okay, I whispered to Axel, I can see these rocks and some dust, so I guess I must be here. Give me your first moon coordinate, preceding it with the word moon. I wrote down moon and the ordinate, and nothing happened. I was still where I had touched down. Give it again, more slowly, I asked. He did so, and I experienced a blurred kind of vision, a sense of zooming across a plain, some mountains, and then into darkness, which surprised me. It's dark here, I said. Why is that? Rhetorical question, Axel. Please do not speak in answer. Darkness. Then slowly, as if adjusting to a kind of night vision, I could begin to perceive formations, and I realized what had happened. This coordinate, I asked, is it on the dark side of the moon? Yes, it must be. I began trying to make sense of the impressions I was acquiring. Well, I seemed to be near a cliff of some kind. It goes upward quite high, made of some kind of dark rock. There is whitish sand, a fluffy kind of sand. Away from the cliff formation there is a broad expanse of some kind. There are some patterns in the sand, or whatever it is, not quite like sand. What do the patterns look like? Axel interjected. He was not supposed to intrude with questions, but he had, so I went with it. Well, I now closed my eyes. Sort of like little tufts of dunes, as if the wind had made a kind of pattern. After a moment of considering these little dunes, but there is not supposed to be any wind on the moon, is there? No atmosphere. Yet I can sense something like atmosphere. I'm getting a little confused. Let's take a break. Was I mistaken? Axel Rhodes seemed to be looking at me in a rather strange way, as if swallowing a desire to speak. Well, I went on. What they actually look like are like rows of largest tractor tread marks. But I don't understand how this could be, so they must be something I don't understand. They're just marks of some kind. Strange though. I was silent for a moment. Axel, do you want... Well, am I supposed to try to see metals or something here or what? I'm just near this cliff here. It has a kind of shiny quality to it, something like obsidian. Axel answered. No, we can go on to the next coordinate now. Give me a moment, I asked. Then on my signal, lay it on me. I wrote down the next ordinate. The cliff vision faded, and in a few moments I was clearly at another place, which I could hardly believe was on the moon. I'm sorry, Axel, I seem to have gotten back to Earth here. Why do you think that? He asked. Well, there are some... I stopped. I looked at Axel. Maybe we better take a break, a little coffee, and then we can try again. Okay, but what did you see? I have no idea, but whatever it is, it couldn't be on the moon. I had visions of $1,000 a day coming to an abrupt end. So we had coffee and chatted up this and that. Axel, for the first time, seemed somewhat nervous. In about 15 minutes, we got back to it. I went through the same process of going away from the sun until I was at the moon. Okay, give me that coordinate again. He did. I wrote it down slowly, making sure I made no error in doing so. I became aware of a greenish haze, which is what I had seen before. This time I decided to go for it, for better or worse. Well, I'm in a place which is sort of down, like in a crater, I suppose. There is this strange green haze, like a light of some kind. Beyond that, all around, it's dark though, and I'm wondering where the light is coming from. I jolted to a stop again. After a moment, Axel prodded. Yes, what else? Well, you won't like this, I guess. I see, or at least think I see, well, some actual lights. They are giving off a green light. I see 2 rows of them. Yes, sort of like lights at football arenas, high up. Banks of them. Up on towers of some kind. I gave up here. Well, Axel, I can't be on the moon. I guess I have to apologize. I seem to be getting somewhere on Earth. Axel stared at me for a moment. He was not smiling or looking sympathetic or tolerant. I thought it was all over with. You sure you see lights, actual lights? He finally asked. Well, I see lights, but how can they be on the moon? Axel had a pencil in his hands, which he was twirling around and around. His gnat smile developed into a frown. Shit, he finally uttered, and broke the pencil in half. I was quite surprised and fully expected him to stand up and leave the room in dismay at my remote viewing flub, but he did not. Lights, huh? You are sure you saw lights? Well, yes, but not on the moon, surely. I mean, how could they be on the moon? Axel stared at me, saying nothing. I can be quite dense, I suppose, but something started twanging around in the denseness. I blinked at Axel. You mean? I began somewhat uncertain as to what to say. I realized I had to select my words carefully. Am I to think these lights are actually on the moon? There was no answer forthcoming from Axel. I pressed onward. Have the Russians built a moon base or something? Is that what I'm supposed to be remote viewing? Again, no answer. We sat and stared at each other for a longish period, he not willing to comment. After a moment of this confrontation, I decided to reassume the initiative. Maybe you should give me that coordinate again. Once back in the glow of the greenish lights, I now seemed to have the courage to begin really looking. Well, the light seems diffused somehow, as if there is a lot of fog. No, it's dust. Dust. Floating in the air. I paused, then continued. Yet there is no air on the moon, is there? There is noise of some kind, like a thumping. I can see one of the light towers better now. Hey, it seems built of some very narrow struts of some kind. Thin like pencils, like some sort of prefab stuff right out of Buckminster's Fuller's stuff. How high are the light towers? Axel interrupted. Well, high enough. Now I have to find something against which to compare them. Let's see. Hey, there are some of those tractor tread marks everywhere. If I guess these are about a foot wide. Well then, let's see. If I compute as correctly as I can. Well, I paused looking at Axel. He was not smiling. Yes? He arched his eyebrows. Well, tall about, or let's say over 100 feet, but what? Axel asked, leaning forward. I swallowed hard and almost chickened out at this point. Well, I think I got a glimpse of the crater's edge. On it, I think I saw a very large tower, very high that is. Yes? Yes, big, really big. How big? I swallowed again. If I compare it to something I'm familiar with in New York, about as high as the Secretariat building at the United Nations, which has 39 floors in it. Axel narrowed his lips. You can see that then. But this is, as I took it, was a question Axel was asking himself more than me. Again, the silence. I decided to again assume whatever initiative I could. Am I then to assume this stuff really is on the moon? If so, this is more than a moon base, isn't it, Axel? Again, no answer. So I continued. But this stuff is big. Does NASA or the Soviet space program have the capability of getting such large stuff onto the moon? I thought everyone was having trouble getting a couple of guys and a dog into orbit. I thought the only thing we got on the moon was a flag planet in some crater somewhere. As I talked to myself through all this, a certain glimmer began to dawn in the recesses of my mental darkness. I suddenly stopped speaking. I stared incredulously at Axel. You mean, am I to assume this stuff is not ours, not made of Earth? Axel raised his eyebrows, trying to grin. Quite a surprise, isn't it? He said. I had a sense he was trying not to be emotional. Surprised? To say the least. I was completely dumbfounded to the degree that I had begun taking very short breaths, getting dizzy thereby. I take it you would like to take a break before we continue, Axel ventured. What I really needed was a recovery couch. In fact, I still get breathless, even as I write these very words now. It's one thing to read about UFOs and stuff in the papers or in books. It is another to hear rumors about the military or government having an interest in such matters, rumors which say they have captured aliens and downed alien spacecraft. But it's quite another matter to find oneself in a situation which obviously confirms everything. Not principally because I suddenly knew the rumors were true, but because I found myself in a situation in which I, in my psychic processes, had seen the evidence for myself. Good heavens, I breathed. My brains began racing, putting things together. Axel, though, and the twins, and the elaborate secrecy of this whole mission was the best evidence. I was now completely certain that I was physically present in some kind of ultra secret place, and that the mission of this place was to sort out extraterrestrial matters. I knew that NASA must have photographic evidence of activities on the moon, which already confirmed the presence of extraterrestrial activity there. What I did not understand, though, and I realized this only with my third cup of coffee and my 10th cigar, was why this ultra-secret project needed my services. So I looked at Axel, and at this time was not smiling either. Why the hell have you dragged me into this, Axel? If you possess enough to cause what I take is your mission to come into existence, surely you don't need my inputs here. Well, Ingo, no and yes. I'm confused, I said rather sternly. Please explain. I can't. Well, at least I cannot give you information. It was felt that doing so would jeopardize not only us, but our mission. You seem bright enough, though. Yeah, thanks heaps, Axel. Well, this bit of security almost blew it for me. Had I not learned some time ago to accept and describe what I was seeing psychically, accept it before prejudging it, I would not have dared to say I saw lights on the moon. I would have edited that out, fearing others might see me as loony. God damn it. ET's on the moon, no less. Well, Axel began, if I had told you in advance, would you have thought I was loony? Axel asked. He had a point. And all of this was real. I closed my eyes as waves of goosebumps cascaded through my body. I couldn't control them, so I broke into tears. Shall I leave you to recover? Axel asked. If I can be by myself, yes, but if one of those goddamn musclemen twins has to stand and watch me blunder, don't you dare. No way do I want them to see me in this condition. They will understand perfectly. We have all experienced a considerable amount of emotional surprise. I can't believe that either of those twins would ever think about crying. But suddenly, through my emotions, I started laughing, almost uncontrollably. This is serious, isn't it? I finally managed to blurt out, but my thoughts were going a mile a minute. The bottom line, we are not alone. And some ultra-secret, presumably governmental agency goddamn well knew it. My glee changed swiftly into anger. Well, whoever's in charge of these matters hasn't managed them very well as far as us ordinary public types are concerned. I'll concede that, Ingo, Axel said. Frankly, no one has known what to do and many mistakes have been made. Yes, and all in the name of what? Privileged information in favor of a few, of the military or scientists, or what? Sometimes, but the problems are more than you can imagine. Don't give me that, Axel. Here you drag me into a very scary situation, ask me to utilize my thing in a very strange way, and ask me to see for you're something I cannot imagine? Get out of here, man. I don't buy it. I don't like this. I don't like it at all. Axel and I sat staring at each other, and neither of us was smiling. Do you want to leave then? He finally asked. We would do whatever you want. Of course I didn't want to leave. I wanted to understand. Why do you need my services? Just answer that one question. If that stuff is on the moon, why don't you just send along another moon mission and have a good look-see? But the awful truth dawned in a burst of light. I looked at him. Unless they, I can't believe this, unless they somehow have told you to stay away and somehow shown you they mean it. This time Axel was neither smiling nor not smiling. I got out of my chair and started pacing the length of the table. I started laughing. God damn it, they somehow got you by the balls, haven't they? That's why you are resorting to psychic perceptions. Jesus Christ, they are not friendly, are they? Are they, Axel? Axel kept his cool. There are two major reasons why I've asked you to help. You are approximately correct about the first one, but not completely so. The second reason is more simple. Your information might provide a kind of checkpoint in what you surely now realize must be a mess of interpretations of photographic and other evidence. It was my idea to find a psychic who did not know anything about the moon and see what might be seen there. Sort of an independent source of information, which we would lean our interpretations one way or another. Have you used other psychics then? I demanded, very intent on getting an answer. Please don't require me to say yes or no. I felt my patience thinning out. Why not? There are several reasons, but mainly there is a confidence factor involved. Confidence about what? About the abilities of other psychics? Yes, that is one of them. I sat back in my chair and, trying to keep my hands from shaking too obviously, lit another cigar. My brain was whirling. So, I began. The only major way now to spy on those guys is to resort to psychic abilities, which the mainstream of our great nation makes a special effort to discredit. What a gas. What a complete gas. I started giggling. Well, speaking of who's got who by the balls, I've suddenly got you by yours, haven't I? Axel sighed. Well, they said you were quick on the uptake and stubborn, and can throw tantrums. I see they were right. They? Who is they? I asked, but I couldn't stop giggling. Before he could answer, which he obviously didn't want to anyway, I had another brainstorm coming on. I suppose then the Soviets are having the same problem. Don't tell me the Soviets haven't resorted to their psychics. Axel had resumed his stoic smiling, not smiling face. I jumped out of my chair again. Got you again, haven't I? I almost shouted. You know the Russians are using psychics, and you are afraid they will get psychic moon information before we do. At this point, I sensed now I felt I had a grip on everything and suddenly felt energetically depleted. I want to take a 20-minute nap, I stated, and headed for the bedroom. After that and some food, we can get back to work. I don't remember even getting onto the bed, but I suppose I did, and afterward learned that I had slept for 6 hours. Chapter 5. Humanoids on the Moon. Back at work, Axel gave me moon coordinates, each set representing specific locations on the moon's surface. At some of the locations there seemed to be nothing to see except moonscapes. But at other locations, well, there were confusions, and I perceived a lot that I could not understand at all. I made a lot of sketches, identified them as this or that, or looking like something else. Without comments, Axel Rode quickly took possession of each sketch, and I was never to see them again. I found towers, machinery, lights of different colors, strange-looking buildings. I found bridges whose function I couldn't figure out. One of them just arced out and never landed anywhere. There were a lot of domes of various sizes, round things like small saucers with windows. These were stored next to crater sides, sometimes in caves, sometimes in what looked like airfield hangars. I had problems estimating sizes, but some of the things were very large. I found long tube-like things, machinery, tractor-like things going up and down hills, straight roads extending some miles, obelisks which had no apparent function. There were large patterns on domes, large cross-like structures, holes being dug into crater walls, and floors obviously having to do with some kind of mining or earth-moving operations. There were nets over craters, houses in which someone obviously lived, except that I could not see who, save in one case. In that case, I saw some kind of people busy at work on something I could not figure out. The place was dark, the air was filled with a fine dust, and there was some kind of illumination, like a dark lime green fog or mist. The thing about them was that they either were human or looked like us exactly. But they were all males. As I could well see this, they were all butt-ass naked. I had absolutely no idea why. They seemed to be digging into a hillside or a cliff. As I described, they must have some way of creating a good environment, warm and with air in it. But why would they be going around naked? No answer was forthcoming to this self-question. But being there in my psychic state, as I felt I was, some of those guys started talking excitingly and gesticulating. Two of them pointed in my direction. Immediately I felt like running away and hiding, which I guess I psychically did since I lost sight of this particular imaging. I think they've spotted me, Axel. They were pointing at me, I think. How could they do that unless they have some kind of high psychic perceptions too? Axel said in a calm, low voice, so low I hardly heard it at first. Please quickly come away from that place. My eyes were wide as understanding drained in. You already know they are psychic, don't you? Axel raised his eyebrows and gave a deep sigh. And at that point, he abruptly closed his folders. I think we had better end our work here. I was quite surprised, but I had not fallen off the psychic truck yesterday. You think? You already know. Would they have some kind of telepathy? That they can trace where this psychic probe is coming from? Is that it? Axel had started smiling again, but obviously was not going to respond. Come on, Axel, loosen up a little. But I was not to be deterred. Would they kill an Earth psychic if they felt he or she was good enough to spy on them? There is no conclusive evidence to suggest that, Axel responded. I gritted my teeth. No conclusive evidence? What the hell does that mean? My voice had climbed several octaves. It's very difficult for us to assess any of this, Axel Rode began. We don't know, but that they do have things and capabilities we here are trying to understand is very apparent. Whether they spotted you or not will be unclear, but we have to put no prejudgment on what guides our mission. At any rate, we don't want to put you at any more risk. Let's eat some dinner and then get you back to New York. I'm afraid we have to repeat the process used to get you out here. I hope you don't mind. We are very grateful. Risk? What do you mean risk? I could see Axel Rode was prepared to be non-committal, so I took the initiative. If it's telepathy, then it's a different kind, at least from how it's understood here on Earth. It's not just telepathy either. This got his attention. He looked at me in surprise. What do you mean? At this, I finally comprehended that his earlier interest in telepathy had not just been innocent chit-chat. Well, I don't know exactly. It's more than just mind and mind. It's like, well, I was grasping for words. Well, when they saw me, they couldn't really see me, could they? What then were they seeing? I'm asking myself this, Axel. Yes, go on, he said. Well, it's more like they were feeling rather than seeing or picking up on my vibes. It's more like it was, yes, sort of a dimensional thing. Rather, sort of like a ripple in some kind of cross-dimensionality. Yes, that's it. They felt something. Not particularly me, but something. I paused. And they knew what the ripple meant, like a sort of penetration of where they were. I paused, then said in a self-introspecting way, wow. Axel sat quietly, as was his way, looking at me. Then, why did you say wow? Well, if I can articulate it, it was like there is sort of cross-dimensional. Well, if you can imagine that you feel a presence but can't see it, it was something like that. Only those guys, they were going to hone in on it At least, that's the best way to describe it. Axel was silent for a moment. So you are referring to telepathy plus something else? No, not exactly. Perhaps something else plus telepathy. It's the other way around. After all, the basis for telepathy has to come from something, rather, because of something. What do you mean? Well, nothing happens all by itself. There are always processes involved. This is to say, things happen by way of something. Nothing comes out of thin air. It's hard to articulate in simple three-dimensional terms. Mind to mind is a three-dimensional construct. But what if? Axel interrupted. Why would mind to mind be three-dimensional? Well, one mind existing as a three-dimensional thing communicating with another which is also a three-dimensional thing, and they're communicating across the distance. Is not the distance involved conceived of in three-dimensional terms? The physical universe is three-dimensional, not the mental universe. Here's one of the big flaws in all theories about psi. Everyone thinks of psi only in three-dimensional terms. I ran out of words at this point. Axel was looking at me with his calm, unblinking eyes, but he was lightly drumming his fingers on the table. I knew I had hit something of concern, and his next comment proved it. Can you write down your ideas along these lines? I could. I did. I remember producing 15 handwritten pages. After this somewhat inscrutable advisory, there came a handshake, the hood, a chopper ride by the twins, and the same car was delivered back to the center of Washington and let off at the train station at my request. The twins said no more than they had to. I found myself wondering if they actually came from the moon. I spent the next few months wondering if the ETs were going to find me and zap my brains out of existence. When I left Mr. Axel Rhodes' carefully hidden establishment, he reminded me of my pledge, 10 years of confidentiality. Not to worry, Axel, I replied. I have no intention of demolishing my official research work by introducing something so far out as claiming I have seen extraterrestrials working away on the moon. No one would believe me anyway. I have abided by that promise well past the 10-year mark. The reasons I have now decided to write about all of this will become clear in later chapters. As I departed, Mr. Axel Rhodes asked that if he again had need of me, would I be interested? Probably, I responded, for how could I not be? Jesus Christ, ETs on the moon and some official investigative agency? Who could resist? Good, he replied. But my name, Axel Rhodes, is now retired when you leave here and will not be used again. We will be in touch with you in some other fashion, which I will make sure you recognize. If anyone ever asks you about Mr. Axel Rhodes or about this place, or asks you if you know anything about it, such inquiries will not be coming from us. Please act accordingly, for our sakes and your own. God, scary, huh? What had I gotten into? But his advice came in handy when, about 3 years later, my telephone rang. It was a Mr. Dillons or Dallins, I didn't quite get which, who said he was an investigative reporter digging into government cover-ups of UFO situations. I said I didn't know anything about that, other than what I had read in various books and articles. He brushed aside my evasion and asked if I knew Mr. Axel Rhodes. Who? I asked in return. You know, the investigative reporter said, Mr. Axel Rhodes. Never heard of him. There was a silence at the other end of the telephone, and then a caller clicked off without so much as a thank you or goodbye, leaving me with shaking hands and much in memory of Axel Rhodes' forewarning. You want a basis for paranoid tensions? After leaving Mr. Axel Rhodes and back in New York, I decided I was pretty much a wreck. I slept for about 2 days, dumbly watching the boob tube between naps and such, and I ate a lot. Then when I began to get it, and all its implications back together, I decided to make some sketches of what I remember drawing for Axel. I couldn't remember any of the coordinate numbers, and the names of the planes and craters on the moon were never used when we were doing the remote viewings, so I don't know where these intelligent-made structures and such were actually located on the moon, but I could hardly forget what I had seen. I made several larger drawings and then decided to fit them onto 2 pages, which I then placed in my bank's safe box, since I had visions of my home and studio covertly being gone through without my knowledge. Paranoia rode high with me for quite some time. but I suppose my safe box was just as accessible to the covert powers that be. There were 2 pages of sketches in which will be presented ahead. Chapter 6. Feedback of sorts. Considering the rather dramatic aspect of the Axl Rose affair, it might at first seem unlikely that I could forget about it. But except for meeting the contacts in front of a stuffed elephant and having a hood placed over my head, the Axl Rose affair wasn't all that different from many other official and unofficial experiments I got involved with. Many of those experiments had equally dramatic elements. Most were done in careful secrecy, and my weekly schedule along these lines was jammed with this kind of activity. One might wonder how it is possible to forget about humanoids and structures on the moon. Well, for one thing, there was a 50-50 chance they were there or not there. Further, as with all side experiments, there was a 100% chance I had been viewing my imagination and fantasies. As I took it, there was to be no feedback to help resolve the imagination issue one way or another. Since people tend to operate based on feedback, they tend to forget about stuff that never achieves the feedback. Then, there are 2 additional but extremely subtle phenomena that appear to be involved. They can begin to take on meaning only if they are identified and opened up for inspection. The first phenomenon has to do with the fact that most people forget and avoid whatever does not fit within consensus realities. The second phenomenon has to do with the fact that most humans forget about the moon altogether. It is there, of course, but beyond that, interest in it is exceedingly minimal. It is somewhat difficult to articulate this. One way of beginning to do so is to point out that people are very much interested in Mars, for example, or in the possible existence of intelligent beings somewhere in the very far distant reaches of space. But with the moon, it is almost as if Earthside human consciousness of the satellite is somehow rigged so as, number 1, to avoid thinking too much about it, and number 2, to disregard any unusual lunar phenomena. I'll try better to articulate these 2 factors ahead. As it was back in 1975 and 1976, if not actually forgotten, my memory of the Axl Rose affair had receded into some deeper subliminal areas of memory storage. And if I thought about the affair at all, it was only to note that it had happened, that it was over and done with, and that I didn't dare talk about it for reasons so numerous that it was the better part of valor to forget about them too. However, whoever or whatever is behind the scenes dealing out the cards of circumstances was not finished with the Axl Rose affair. For at some point in 1976, during the summer I think, what might be called the second chapter of the Axl Rose affair opened up. For I received in the mail, in a plain envelope which did not bear a return address or even a postmark, although it did have stamps, the envelope contained a book and nothing more. It was entitled, Somebody Else is on the Moon. The author's name was George Leonard. I spent the next few hours reading it and then reread it 2 more times. Apparently, at the time of my ultra-secret visit, Mr. Axl Rose had already known that this book was coming out, and of course he had been interested in whether I knew the author or not. Leonard apparently had obtained NASA photographs of the moon, which after all are in the public domain, because most of NASA's work is funded by our tax-paying money. What NASA knows, the frontispiece of the book began, but won't divulge. With careful logic and reason, George Leonard has studied all the data, including official NASA photographs and the astronauts' Apollo tapes, to prove his theory of a highly advanced underground civilization that is working the surface of the moon, mining, manufacturing, communicating, and building. Leonard's book was filled with verifiable data, official photos, and sketches of structures, etc. he created from photos. Well, I can tell you, I ran to my own drawings and spent a week comparing and recomparing them to the sketches and photos George Leonard had provided in his own book. Many of Leonard's sketches resemble some of mine. Yes, indeed, the mysterious Mr. Axelrod had provided me feedback as promised, but there could be no doubt that it was his jolly self that sent Leonard's book to me. But could Leonard's book be considered adequate feedback? Well, if not completely, at least somewhat. For example, are there structures on the moon? As Leonard pointed out, one of the most remarkable photos taken by the astronauts of Apollo 12 on their flights around the moon portrays what is referred to as Super Rig 1971 NASA Photo 71-H-781, and which is very similar to another photo of a similar Super Rig, NASA Photo 66-H-1293, taken 5 years earlier. The astronauts of Apollo 14, 1971, obviously were expecting to see this rig or one like it. When it apparently came into view, they referred to it as Annabelle, which was just like the one we saw yesterday. She's sitting right on the ledge and must be over a mile high. Did you see that? The light flares coming from the dark part of the crater just below Annabelle. Oh, cameras, don't fail us now. This conversation is paraphrased from that given on page 54 of Leonard's book. Indeed, there seems to be a number of towers on the moon and an equal amount of confusion about them, as I discovered when I later began my moon research in earnest. During the early 1960s, NASA sent orbiters to the moon in preparation for the manned Apollo missions. A released NASA photo number Lunar Orbiter 3-84M quite clearly shows two structures rising up in the Sidus Medae region. The first of these two became referred to as the Shard. This structure towers up from the moon's surface for about 1.5 miles. Near the Shard is another structure referred to as the Tower. This has been photographed 4 times from 2 different altitudes. It rises up about 5 miles and is capped with what appears to be cubes joined together to form a very large mushroom-like crown having an estimated width of over 1 mile. Several independent geologists who have examined the photos indicate that no known natural process can explain the 2 structures, which is something of an understatement. Please note that copies of the photos referred to above can still be obtained from NASA suppliers, but I've been told that evidence of the towers has now been airbrushed out. After studying Leonard's book, during the next 2 weeks, I wasn't certain whether to sleep or stay awake, and all my bio and mental cycles found themselves quite interrupted. I fully expected that Leonard's book would shake the nerves of all us Earthlings, but most people I ran it to just smiled and said that Leonard's opinions must be just that, and that there must be some other, more logical explanation. Even some UFO people I knew were hardly interested, a factor which I found then and now quite confusing and mysterious. As it turned out, it seems that most people simply couldn't handle the implication of Leonard's book. Today, when I mention it to people, well, they blink, have never heard of it, and a sort of film appears over their eyeballs. That they don't want to hear of it is more likely the case. Well, I was interested by the implications, for if there are extraterrestrials on the moon, surely getting themselves to Earth should not be much of a problem for them. I thus decided in my small mental recesses to be sure that we on Earth may have neighbors who are not from Earth, and or that some of our systems and organizations may indeed contain extraterrestrial influences in them. I mean, how much does it take to put 2 and 2 together? I began to see why Mr. Axelrod's group, if they themselves were not extraterrestrials, as I wondered at times, was ultra secret and came and went under changing subterfuges of one kind or another. Soon, however, I was sucked back into the hectic pace of my life and research work. Soon, I had forgotten of all this. If I thought about it at all, it was only to have the fleck of an idea that the Leonard book constituted the feedback, and so that was that. Chapter 7. The events in Los Angeles. During August and September 1976, I traveled several times between SRI and Los Angeles. I went to La La Land to pursue yet another of the many kinds of studies I had undertaken, hopefully to increase my understanding of higher human functions. I had several good friends in La La Land, and I was staying in the house of one of them. This was a certain Conrad W., who had many extraordinary qualities. One had the feeling that Conrad was a kind of uncomplicated old soul who was somewhat out of place in a modernist society that had become dramatically detached from even remote elements of wisdom. Conrad seemed to absorb insightful information by telepathic osmosis. He was articulate about many things, but very laid back and with a subtle sense of humor. In other words, he was delightful to be with. I was also in touch with the marvelous researcher Dr. Shafika Karangula and her research companion Dr. Viola Neal, both of whom have passed on. Shafika was a neuropsychiatrist who had broken with mainstream psychiatry to establish the Higher Sense Perception Foundation, and had published in 1967 her famous book, Breakthrough to Creativity. Viola was a notable clairvoyant whose psychic mapping of human biofields and psychic diagnosis of diseases had been confirmed by doctors and in hospitals. Viola and Shafika were very kind to me in many ways. Their combined knowledge levels seemed extensive, even endless. One had the impression that their consciousness were existing in some higher frequency range from where they could look down into the dross of average human life. And in this dross, this dynamic duo could perceive conspiracies everywhere at work. Conspiracies erecting invisible prisons into which human abilities were incarcerated and destroyed. Beyond this, the two were plugged into the unofficial tom-toms of Science Central and its many fringes, which included parapsychology, governmental plans and plots, and the carryings-on of contemporary mystic occultists. But they were careful about relaying important gossip because, as they said, doing so was dangerous not only to reputations, but in extreme cases, to life and limb. They were interested in my work, but a little paranoid because of the close governmental connections to the development project at Stanford Research Institute. What this meant was that the duo would gossip only to a certain degree about the conspiracies of the world, but were careful not to say too much. I, of course, wanted the whole package, for Karangula was not simply one of those off-the-wall conspiracy buffs dwelling in notable confusions characteristics of at least some conspiracy enthusiasts. In her earlier days in the Middle East, she had actually worked for a number of official intelligence agencies, and in truth she was familiar with the internal workings of the vast international sub-Rosa organizations. In order to get deeper into the whole conspiracy package trembling within the duo, I had found that if I plied them with a little good wine, their reticence lost its edge and they talked more freely. While staying at Conrad's place, I planned another liquid safari into their reticence. Conrad was also a conspiracy addict, as was I, and so I asked him if we could have the duo to dinner at his place. Since gourmet cooking was a passion with me and with Conrad, and since I had explained the full purpose of the meal, we had to plan a superlative menu and lay in supplies for it. The supplies, of course, including reasonably good wines. Conrad drove us to a very large Hollywood supermarket filled with, among other things, the lush produce of the San Fernando Valley farms and orchards. I had decided to start the meal with artichokes stuffed with crab and breadcrumbs, topped with cheese melted with a fine brandy. In order to reduce shopping time, I gave Conrad a list of other comestibles. He went in the direction of the meats, and I went in the direction of the veggies. The supermarket had huge tables with artichokes, and one of the artichoke tables was standing a ravishing woman. She was notable not so much for her excessive female physical endowments, but by the fact that they were barely covered. She was dressed in the briefest of halters of pink with big yellow polka dots. Beneath that were short shorts, so short they were barely existing. Far beneath that, she wore a pair of platform high heels about 8 inches high. She had volumes of gorgeous black hair, and her eyes were covered by purple sunglasses. She was absolutely awesome. I thought, good heavens. She was rummaging through the artichokes, and I wanted some too, so I worked my way covertly and nonchalantly into her proximity so I could closer appreciate her near-naked breasts. To make this look natural, with my eyes barely on them, I fumbled some selected artichokes into a bag. And then, for absolutely no reason at all, I experienced an electrifying wave of goosebumps throughout my whole body. The hair on my arms practically stood at attention, and the hair on my neck definitely did. Without rhyme or reason, or forethinking, or anything at all, I suddenly knew she was an alien, an extraterrestrial. My throat went dry, my hands started shaking, and so I decided to back off and started examining the oranges and grapefruits for the fruit aspect Conrad and I were going to try to achieve. To get to the oranges, I had to turn, and then, way down the lineup of vegetable cases, I recognized, of all astounding and impossible things, one of the twins. He was watching the woman. He saw that I saw him, and there immediately arose in my mind the image of a white card. Please do not speak, and please act normal. Trying to gather my surprised wit, by now somewhat shattered, the silliest thought then occurred to me. Well, if one of the twins is here, of all places, then the other one must be too. And sure enough, the other twin was at the opposite end of the vegetable lineup, and he was watching the woman too. This time, both the twins were dressed in black, not the infamous black suits worn by those who are said to warn those who have seen UFOs not to talk about them. Here were black jeans, black boots, black tank tops, looking like macho hoodlums of the LA variety. At this point, I realized that I was somewhere I should not be, and I made a hasty and strategic retreat to the bread section on the other side of the store. By the time I reached the bread section, a considerable wave of terror had begun to make itself felt. Something here now needs to be clarified. If I hadn't seen the twins, I might have attributed to my imagination something of the strange effect I experienced near the ultra-sensuous woman. But that was now not possible at all. The twins' presence, coupled with my psychic alert, confirmed that the woman was an ET. I don't quite remember how the rest of the shopping went. Conrad and I got our groceries checked out. On the way to the car, I explained that we would not attempt the orange aspect after all. Once in his car, in the parking lot, I asked him to wait a few moments. He asked what was wrong. I said, just wait. Shortly, the female came out pushing a loaded grocery cart. Study that one and tell me what you think. Conrad looked briefly at the woman and then said the most remarkable thing. Well, if you mean do I think she's an extraterrestrial, yes, said Conrad in a bored way. We've got a lot of them here in La La Land. I didn't ask him what he thought about the two who were observing her squeezing her fabulousness and groceries into her broken down yellow Volkswagen. I sank down in Conrad's car and urged him to make a quick departure. The dinner for Shafika and Viola was a complete success. Naturally, after plying them and ourselves with copious amounts of good wine, we told them that we had seen yet another ET down at the supermarket. This opened up rather inebriated discussions about the ET civilization which was busy infiltrating Earth. Shafika and Viola discussed all of these things in whispers. and the more serious they became, the harder it was to hear them. Viola. There are a lot of them here, you know, and many are bio-androids. Shafika. They're dangerous, you know, and they realize that Earth psychics are their only enemies. Be careful, Ingo. Be very careful. All of this information package without me ever mentioning the Axl Rose event. Chapter 8, Grand Central Station. It was only a few days after the encounter that I returned to New York for much needed relief from research. I only half expected a call from Mr. Axl Rose. It was not long in coming. The phone rang early one evening and a cheery female voice on the other end asked, "Mr. Swann?" I said yes.